Welcome to the weekly show with Trevor McManus. Joining me today is a man who literally is the be-all and end-all for hockey in Canada. He's a former editor of the Hockey News, columnist for the Toronto Star, and now you can see him pretty much on any show on TSN, as well as all over sports radio across Canada. If that wasn't enough, you can find him all over Twitter, where he has over 500,000 loyal followers. Bob McKenzie. Bob, thanks for joining me today. Is there an internal kind of struggle or competition between you and, say, Darren Dreger or Gord when it comes to breaking news?
No, none whatsoever. We really work together well as a team. A lot of the deals that you see, maybe I'll break a deal, maybe Gord Miller will break a deal, maybe Darren Dreger will, maybe Pierre LeBrun will, maybe Aaron Ward will. The list goes on and on. We've got all sorts of people who work for our network, and we all work together, and you wouldn't believe how many times it takes three or four of us to nail something down. That it starts with the kernel of information from one of the guys, and then because we all have so many contacts in the game, it kind of snowballs from there, and if we're fortunate, we get things nailed down and figure out what's going on.
The whole Jarome Iginla thing that happened late last week, was that embarrassing for the network there, or was that just part of the game?
Well, it's part of the game, but it's also embarrassing. Our motto has always been to be the source for everything, be right, and then be first. It was a unique circumstance, mind you. Aaron Ward reported something on the air, turned out not to be true. Once we found out it wasn't true, he quickly took ownership of that and said that he'd made a mistake. And on top of that, over the next 24 to 36 hours, if you listen to Pete Chiarelli, the general manager of the Boston Bruins, you can see where some of the confusion emanated on this. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. There's no excuse for it. People want to trust the word that you've got. And but having said that, I would stack TSN's record against anybody's in terms of accuracy over any period of time. And we're content with the job that we do on that front.
You called that a very unique situation. Have you ever seen something like that before?
Well, Eric Lindros got traded twice. Got traded to two teams at the same time. The New York Rangers and the Philadelphia Flyers both claimed to have deals with the Quebec Nordiques back in the day, and that revolutionized how trade calls are done and how the league approves trades. And there was actually a huge investigation, independent investigation of the National Hockey League to determine exactly who had Eric Lindros and who didn't. Of course, it turned out to be the Philadelphia Flyers, not the New York Rangers, but there was evidence to suggest that the Quebec Nordiques had actually traded him twice. And that never actually happened with the Boston Bruins and the Calgary Flames, but the Boston Bruins, and Pete Chiarelli's on record as saying this, certainly believed that they had a deal with the Calgary Flames. The Calgary Flames had obviously agreed to a deal, but the third party there was Jarome Iginla, and he hadn't formally signed off on anything. So it's not a done deal until it's done, and that ended badly for everybody that day, but except for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I guess. But it's a highly unusual circumstance. Doesn't happen very often. But you know what? It's getting more and more complicated that way, and there's more and more players with no trades and no moves. That it becomes that much more difficult to nail down a trade, because there are so many moving parts and legalities involved in it now.
Are no trade clauses hurting the trading business for teams? Because like you said, if there was no trade clause there, Boston would have a huge asset in Jarome Iginla.
Yeah, it complicates things, but in the grand scheme of things, it's they're here to stay. That's not going to change. So I don't see that changing at any time in the future, and everybody's just got to kind of be wary of that aspect of the business now.
If you can go on your instincts, knowledge, and looking at the standings absolutely right now, who's in the Stanley Cup Final this year?
Boy, oh boy, that's a good question. I don't really make predictions to that end. If I did, I always tell people I'd go to Vegas and just bet on the teams and be really wealthy and not have to work for a living. But I don't know. The Pittsburgh Penguins obviously look good, but they've got to get Sidney Crosby back and healthy. They're struggling of late, but they were on a tremendous roll there. I don't put too much stock in the losses they've had lately, other than they were bound not to keep playing. The entire month of March, they never lost a game. So they were bound for a letdown. And with Crosby's injury, those two things probably tie together. Patrice Bergeron being injured for the Boston Bruins. I mean, if he's not healthy, then the Boston Bruins, who I think are a tremendous team and a top contender, and I still think we've got a lot of racetrack to be run here. I'll be interested to see how the New York Rangers do down the stretch here. At the beginning of the season, I thought they were a legitimate cup contender, not based on the way they played most of the year, but maybe post-trade deadline with Ryan Clough and Brassard and the guys they've got in the lineup now, that they're going to start playing to their level. But, the Chicago Blackhawks, Anaheim, they look like the best teams in the West right now. But, hey, we saw an 8 seed last year win it all and look like a juggernaut doing it. So in answer to your question, I haven't got a clue who'll be in the Stanley Cup Final. And we'll have a better idea based on injuries and how people shape up going into the playoffs, maybe a little bit, but even then we'll still be guessing.
I guess that's what makes hockey so exciting. Anytime we've got a big guest, I always post on Twitter and Facebook, and this is probably the most questions we've ever gotten. So congratulations for being probably the most high-profile guest so far. So just some viewer questions. First is from Joe Badajwash. He asks, what is a typical day in the life of Bob McKenzie?
Oh, pretty average. Try to get up anytime, depending on radio commitments, get up anytime between 7 and 8 and start working out of my house. I've got a lot of radio. I do some of it in the morning, different days. But basically just try and get on the internet, Twitter, and see what's news, make a list of things that I want to try to chase down or hit on over the course of the day. If it's a Monday, I've usually got That's Hockey that night. We have NHL games Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There might be insider trading episodes, other episodes of That's Hockey, depending on what it is. So basically work during the day at home and by 4 o'clock, usually in the office, in the studio, Monday to Thursday as a rule. And some nights Mondays I'm done by 8 or 9 and come home. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if there's NHL games, you don't get home until 11 or midnight or later if it's a double header. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm usually at home. But watching hockey, doing a lot of radio, and more often than not, don't need to be in the studio those days, although sometimes that's not always the case.
Ralph Mangid asks, who tells the analysts about the trades? Is it the GMs, the assistants, or some other fly on the wall?
Well, it's kind of all over the map. We talk to GMs, assistant GMs, coaches, players, agents, other media people. You name it. We try to cast as wide a net as possible and just to network as much as possible.
Chris Brams asks whether or not you follow any other sports and if you're as connected in those sports as you are in hockey.
No, I'm not connected in any other sports. I very casually follow other sports, but not to any great degree.
Jeff Clegg asks, I'm a huge Oilers fan. If you had to start a new franchise and had to take one of the big three out of Edmonton, who would you take and why?
Oh, that's a good question. They're all great players, and I guess you could call it the big four. I mean, you've got to put Eberle, Yakupov, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Taylor Hall in that group. Taylor Hall's playing pretty exceptionally right now. Eberle's a clutch guy, as his history at the World Juniors and junior hockey demonstrates. And Nugent-Hopkins, I think, as a center, has maybe the chance to have the highest level of any of them. The guy who makes everybody on the ice better. So I don't know, but Taylor Hall's probably the most dynamic of the four.
Devin Walchuk asks, who is your favorite GM or player you've ever had to deal with?
Don't really have favorites per se. Some I know better than others. Some I've known longer than others. But I wouldn't really say I have a favorite GM. Favorite players, there's players that you like to watch. There's players that you like their personality. You get to know them. Teemu Selanne's always been a favorite of mine in that. But I wouldn't necessarily say I have any favorites.
Talking about players with personality, the next question's from Mindy Singh. She says, Biz Nasty tweeted you, did you hear Gucci Mane was dropped by Waka Flocka Flame from Brick Squad? Bob, are you a fan of hip-hop music?
A little bit, even though I'm an old fogey. But I got two boys. They're 23 and 27, going to be 27 soon. And that's, so yeah, I listen to it now and again. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, it's good.
And this is the final question, probably one of the finest questions we've ever had from Tim Dickert. He asks, has Bob always known everything? Do people even bother playing board games with him? And how did he get to be so awesome?
I don't know about that, but I'm not much of a board game player. And the information that you get is really just calling around and stealing it from people who have it. And when I say stealing, I mean it in the figurative sense. There's a lot of general managers or assistant GMs or scouts or coaches or players, people in junior hockey, people in college hockey, international hockey, agents, people around the game who are willing to share their information, their expertise, their knowledge. And that's really all. It's just being a conduit to get the information out there. That's kind of my job. So that's it.
And what about being so awesome?
Well, I try every day, but there's always room for improvement.
If you're a fan of hockey, then you're automatically a fan of this man here. He's the Hockey Insider. You can find him all over TSN as well as sporadically all over sports radio in Canada. Although he doesn't need the followers, follow him on Twitter anyways, at TSN Bob McKenzie. Bob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure, Trevor. Thanks a lot.